The laughter echoed louder than it should have, sharp and cutting through the quiet hum of the upscale cafe, turning heads and freezing time for a brief, humiliating moment. It wasn't just laughter, it was ridicule, deliberate and cruel, aimed straight at a man who had already endured more than life should have asked of him. Armand Voss, a billionaire known for his cold demeanor and ruthless success, leaned back in his chair, his polished shoes gleaming under the afternoon sun, his smirk carved with arrogance as he mocked the men standing before him, a single father in worn-out clothes, holding on to dignity that looked ready to slip. Before we dive deeper into this emotional journey, take a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the hidden strength of ordinary people, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard. The man being mocked was named Ilyas Karim. His shirt was clean but faded, ironed carefully despite its age, and his hands bore the quiet evidence of years of hard labor. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance to the untrained eye, nothing that would suggest he was anything more than another struggling worker trying to survive in a city that rarely showed mercy. But what no one in that cafe could see, not even the men mocking him, was the weight he carried, not just as a father, but as a dreamer who refused to let life's cruelty define him. It was midday, sunlight streaming through the large glass windows, illuminating the stark contrast between two worlds sitting only a few feet apart. Armand Voss, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, was surrounded by people who laughed when he laughed, nodded when he spoke, and admired him without question. Across from him stood Ilyas, who had come into the cafe not for luxury, but for an opportunity, a chance to apply for a janitorial position he had heard about through a friend. The incident began with something small. Ilyas had accidentally bumped into one of the waiters while trying to navigate the crowded space, causing a tray of drinks to wobble dangerously. Though nothing spilled, the moment drew attention, and attention, in the presence of someone like Armand, often turned into entertainment. Armand had looked up, his eyes scanning Ilyas from head to toe, and something about that brief glance had already decided the man's worth. The first comment was subtle, laced with sarcasm. It was followed by another, sharper, more direct. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted, and what could have been a forgettable moment turned into a spectacle. Armand questioned how someone like Ilyas could even afford to step into such a place, his voice loud enough for others to hear, his words carrying the sting of superiority. The people around him chuckled, some out of amusement, others out of obligation. Ilyas didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, his grip tightening slightly around the folder he carried, documents, certificates, fragments of a life no one had asked about. His silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. He had learned long ago that reacting in anger often cost more than it was worth. Life hadn't always been this way for him. Years ago, Ilyas had been a promising student, the kind who absorbed knowledge like air and saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He had studied languages, not out of necessity, but out of fascination. Words, to him, were bridges between cultures, emotions, and possibilities. He had mastered them quietly, one by one, in late nights lit by borrowed lamps and early mornings filled with determination. But life doesn't always reward passion the way it should. A series of unfortunate events, a sudden illness that took his wife, mounting medical bills, and the responsibility of raising a young daughter, had forced him to abandon his dreams and step into survival mode. Every skill he had, every talent he nurtured, was pushed aside in favor of whatever work he could find to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. His daughter, a beer, was his entire world. Every sacrifice he made, every insult he endured, was for her. She was bright, curious, and full of hope, the kind of child who believed her father could do anything. And in many ways, he could. He just never had the chance to prove it to the world. Back in the cafe, Armand's mocking grew bolder. He made assumptions, painted Ilyas as someone uneducated, someone beneath even the simplest expectations. It was the kind of judgment that came easily to those who had never been forced to fight for dignity. The room watched, some uncomfortable, others entertained, but no one intervened. Then something shifted. Ilyas finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and carried a quiet confidence that didn't match the image others had formed of him. But it wasn't what he said at first, it was how he said it. The tone, the clarity, the precision, it was enough to catch attention. He began in flawless English, addressing Armand with respect but also with a firmness that couldn't be ignored. He acknowledged the misunderstanding, clarified his presence, and gently pointed out that dignity was not determined by wealth or appearance. The room fell quieter, but Armand remained unimpressed. Then, almost unexpectedly, Ilyas continued, but this time in French. His pronunciation was impeccable, his fluency undeniable. A few heads turned, surprised. Before anyone could fully process it, he transitioned into Arabic, his voice flowing with ease, rich and expressive. Then came Mandarin, each word articulated with precision, followed by Spanish, warm and fluid. 5 languages. 5 entirely different worlds, spoken effortlessly by a man who had just been dismissed as insignificant. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a collective realization that something extraordinary had just unfolded. Armand's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to reveal a crack in his confidence. For the first time, he looked at Ilias not as a source of amusement, but as a question he didn't know how to answer. Ilias didn't boast. He didn't raise his voice or demand respect. He simply explained, in a quiet and composed manner, that circumstances do not define capability. That life can push people into positions that don't reflect their true worth. That behind every struggling individual is a story no one has taken the time to understand. Then he apologized, not for himself, but for the inconvenience caused earlier, and turned to leave. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because something about that moment stayed with Armand long after Ilias walked out of the cafe. For a man who had built his empire on sharp judgment and calculated decisions, the encounter unsettled him in a way he couldn't ignore. He had spent years believing that success was a reflection of superiority, that those who struggled simply lacked the ability to rise. But what he had witnessed challenged that belief in a way that numbers and business strategies never could. Days passed, but the memory didn't fade. Armand found himself asking questions he had never considered before. How many others had he misjudged? How many talents had gone unnoticed because they didn't fit into the polished image he respected? Meanwhile, Ilias returned to his life, unchanged on the surface but quietly strengthened within. He didn't expect anything from the encounter. For him, it was just another moment in a long series of challenges. His focus remained on Abir, on ensuring she had opportunities he never did. But fate, as unpredictable as it is, had other plans. A week later, Ilias received a call. It was unexpected, almost suspicious. He had applied to many places, faced rejection after rejection, and learned not to expect good news. But this call was different. It was from Armand's company. He was invited for an interview, not for a janitorial role, but for a position that aligned with his linguistic skills. Confused but hopeful, Ilias accepted. When he arrived at the towering building that housed the company, he felt the familiar weight of doubt creeping in. But this time, he didn't let it take control. He walked in with quiet confidence, carrying not just his documents, but the resilience of everything he had endured. The interview was unlike any he had experienced before. It wasn't about testing his knowledge, it was about understanding his journey. Armand himself was present, not as the men who had mocked him, but as someone trying to make amends. He didn't apologize in words. Instead, he listened, really listened, and in that listening, something shifted, not just for Ilias, but for Armand as well. Ilias was offered the job, not out of pity, but out of recognition. It wasn't an easy transition. The corporate world was different, demanding in ways that challenged him. But Ilias adapted, just as he always had. His skills, once hidden, began to shine. His confidence grew, his circumstances improved, and slowly, the life he had once dreamed of started to take shape. But the most important change wasn't in his career. It was in how the world saw him, and how he saw himself. Months later, as he walked Abir to her school, dressed not in worn-out clothes but in the quiet elegance of someone who had earned his place, he realized something profound. Success isn't always about rising above others. Sometimes, it's about staying grounded while the world finally rises to meet you. And somewhere in the city, a billionaire who once laughed had learned that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in understanding, humility, and the courage to see beyond appearances. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support helps stories like these reach more people. Before the story ends, here's something special. Comment below. Kindness always.